You pet a dog you've never touched before. It flinches, ducks its head, tries to get away. You didn't do anything to it, but someone else clearly did, at some point, somewhere. Meanwhile, in a reserve in Kenya, a herd of elephants walks calmly past a group of tourists. Then a single man shows up, alone, unarmed. The herd panics instantly, even though this man hasn't touched a weapon in years. Coincidence? General nervousness? Some kind of mood spreading through the herd? Research says no. This is something more precise, something tied specifically to this one person. Can animals actually remember which specific human hurt them? Not just vague fear of humans in general, but targeted fear of this exact face, this exact voice, this exact smell. Years after it happened, the answer is yes. And it runs deeper, more precisely, and more unsettlingly than most people assume. Let's start with one of the most famous experiments on this topic. In 2006, behavioral biologist John Marsluff at the University of Washington captured several wild crows on campus, briefly tagged them, and released them. He himself wore a blank rubber mask, a so-called dangerous face. A colleague wore a completely neutral control mask and did nothing to the birds. What happened next surprised even experienced researchers. Whenever anyone wore the dangerous mask, regardless of who was actually underneath it, they were scolded, chased, and dive-bombed. This wasn't limited to the originally captured birds. Crows that had never been trapped at all also recognized the mask as a threat. They'd apparently picked up the knowledge from the affected birds through communal mobbing behavior and direct observation. Over 5 years later, Marsluff wore the mask again on campus. The crows still remembered, measurable in alarm calls and the number of attackers. Some of the originally affected birds were long dead by then, but their offspring, and even unrelated crows from the wider area, still reacted with alarm. With elephants, the evidence is even more striking. Behavioral researcher Karen McComb at the University of Sussex studied wild elephant herds in Kenya in 2011. Her team played the animals' audio recordings of voices from 2 different human ethnic groups: the Maasai, who have historically had occasional conflicts with elephants, sometimes spearing them to protect livestock, and the Kamba, who are primarily farmers and rarely clash with elephants. When the herds heard Maasai voices, they immediately bunched together in fear and fled. With Kamba voices, they stayed calm. The elephants even distinguished between male and female Maasai voices, reacting more strongly to adult men, exactly the group historically responsible for most of the conflicts. Matriarchs carry this knowledge for decades and actively pass it on to younger elephants who were never attacked themselves. Even much smaller brains manage this with ease. Keith Kendrick at the University of Cambridge showed in 2001 that sheep can reliably distinguish individual human faces in photographs and remember that association for more than 2 years. Dogs and horses go a step further, showing measurable physical stress responses whenever a person who previously hit, yelled at, or mistreated them shows up. Cortisol studies in dogs show a clear spike from the mere presence of a person their brain has flagged as threatening. Researchers at the University of Sussex also found that horses can distinguish angry from neutral human facial expressions and remember that distinction for days, tied specifically to that individual. A single incident is enough to form a lasting association. Here's where it gets interesting. What these animals are doing is not revenge, and it is not a conscious moral judgment about guilt. It feels that way to us because we automatically project moral categories onto their behavior. What's actually happening is simple but extremely effective associative learning, essentially classic conditioning. The brain links a face, a smell, a voice, or a silhouette directly to a feeling of danger, often after a single experience, much like how we flinch at a certain sound after an accident without consciously thinking about it. Evolutionarily, this isn't a minor detail. It's central to survival. An animal that doesn't remember who was dangerous to it makes the same mistake twice, and the second time, it might be dead. Memory of pain isn't a moral concept. It's an ancient survival tool, sharpened over millions of years of selection and built into nearly every nervous system we know of. One of the most striking pieces of evidence comes from a completely different nervous system, the octopus. At the Seattle Aquarium in the early 2000s, marine biologist Roland Anderson observed an octopus named Truman apparently targeting one specific caretaker. He repeatedly squirted cold water at her from his funnel whenever she walked past the tank, while other staff went completely unbothered. Anderson had 2 people test this while deliberately wearing identical clothing to keep visual cues as consistent as possible. The octopus still reliably told them apart. A creature with no spine, whose brain evolved on a completely separate branch from ours, could recognize individual humans and apparently knew exactly which one it didn't like. This kind of individual recognition also shows up somewhere painfully concrete: animal shelters. Dogs freeze up around certain types of people, certain tones of voice, or even certain pieces of clothing, while staying relaxed around other strangers entirely. Behaviorists don't classify this as general fear of humans. It's targeted stimulus generalization. The dog's brain has learned to link a bundle of features: the smell of alcohol, a particular tone, a raised hand, with one specific painful experience, and it now reacts to anyone who happens to share enough of those features. That's why a dog might panic around a completely harmless person who's done nothing wrong, simply because they happen to smell, sound, or look like someone who heard it before. That's not a malfunction. It's the same principle as the crow mask, just less precise, because a memory system would rather sound a false alarm than miss a real one. A false alarm only costs energy, but a missed one can cost your life. The dog flinching away from you has no concept of forgiveness and no concept of guilt. It has only failed to forget one thing: a face, a smell, a voice once linked to pain. The elephant herd fleeing from a single man carries that knowledge like an archive passed down across generations, carefully maintained by matriarchs who were never attacked themselves. Forgiveness is a human concept, invented so we could live together in groups. Memory of pain isn't an invention at all. We share it with nearly every nervous system on this planet, from the crow to the horse to the octopus, long before any of us had a word for it. Maybe that's the real takeaway. We're not the only ones who remember who they can trust. We just took the longest to figure that out.